Go. Hey, welcome to our TM seminar. We are, as we've moved our conference online, we've moved our seminars online. My name is Bill Staffieri, and I'm the pastor at Beachpoing Church, and it's an honor to be able to host with you this webinar. We have with us today Kyle Bonenberger. He is one of our TM pastors. He'll help co-host with me, but also give some insights. He's at City Church, and then we also have my friend Jay Kranda. So I'm really excited about having Jay with us. Jay is someone I've known from Biola days. He was one of my students, and someone I continued to bring into my classroom because he was thinking about things that I think most of us were not thinking about yet. And so Jay has been, we were just sharing, he's been the online campus pastor at Saddleback for the last 8 years. He's been there over 10 years. And obviously, he has, in many ways, been able to think about how these things are moving forward. And so, as all of us have become now, in some ways, trying to think about how to do online ministry, it's so good to have you with us, Jay. We're excited to have you. So, before we go to Jay, before we bring in Kyle, we are sponsored today by Gateway Seminary, and we want to show you just a quick a video about Gateway Seminary. You know, for some of you, as you're thinking about what is maybe the next step in your own theological development. And so let's watch this short video from our sponsor, and then we'll get into a discussion in just a moment.
I'm a youth pastor.
I'm a Bible teacher.
I'm a worship leader. Why wait till after you graduate from seminary to make a difference? Here at Gateway Seminary, you can start making an impact from day one.
In a place where you are truly needed.
Where there's not a church on every corner.
Where 39 different languages are used every day.
At Gateway Seminary, you'll study with faculty who have a lifelong commitment to ministry leadership. They'll mentor you as you study and build a strong biblical foundation for your work. They'll serve alongside you as you reach out to people in your community.
Each one of Gateway's 5 campuses is located in Anaheim, Sun City.
My call to ministry began here.
In a place that needs Christian workers.
Among godly mentors.
Pursue your ministry with passion. Be the difference. Study with us at Gateway Seminary.
Well, it's again, it's good to have you guys with us. And so let me just begin by looking at Kyle. Why don't you help welcome us, share a little bit about who you are and what you do, and we'll find a way to get over to Jay in just a second.
Yes, definitely. Thanks for having me, everybody. I'm always grateful to be a part of these. Love TM. Bum the conference is not going to be in person because I always look forward to it and seeing all of you. But man, this is just great that we've been able to do these as a ramp up. So yeah, I started City Church actually 11 years ago, this last weekend. And 6 years ago, we merged with a TM church, became a part of the network, and just really found a home here. Before that, before my days of City Church, I was a TV producer. So did a little bit of that. Also did some stuff at Biola with events and things of that nature. And so anyway, just always love being a part of it, and love being in Bill's group. It's a great thing that we get to do. And if you guys watching aren't in a group, highly recommend you get plugged into one. It's wonderful. So love TM, love this time that we get to spend together. And I got 2 kids and a wife. I should have said it the other way. I have a wife and 2 kids. Excuse me. And we live about a half a mile from the church here in Anaheim. I love Disneyland, love it, and literally almost cried yesterday for how long it's been closed. But that's me.
Okay, so just some quick house rules. If you hear something you like, you hear something that you're inspired by, we'd love for you to put it in the chat if you want to echo something or give some insight. We do have a Q&A button as well that we want you to be able to ask questions, and we will get to those. We're going to have a couple polls that will go. But fascinating to have both of you. So I actually this is so interesting to me. So I actually we had a pastor mentor group, and we were talking about engagement, and it turned to a question of online ministry, and we realized Kyle was way ahead of all of our mentor group pastors. About the same time, I brought Jay into my class I teach at Talbot, and he was sharing about what he's doing. And really, I think like a lot of us, myself, the way I've described it is a lot of us pastors were flirting with online ministry of any kind of thing. Then COVID hit, and we all found ourselves in an arranged marriage, and we're trying to figure out if this is going to be a long-lasting relationship. And so even now, as churches are starting to pivot back to live gatherings, Jay, maybe we could start us off a little bit with this. I think one thing that we're trying to think about is not just how do we stream what we were doing live, but how do we think about this in a much broader context? How do we think about online ministry for the future?
Yeah, and thank you for having me. I'm really excited to share some things we've been learning. You know, I was joking right before we started here that I grabbed one of these things. I don't know if you've seen these, but it's an Oculus Go. It's like a VR. And a lot of times when people think about online, they kind of just think about like this extreme mode. And I see online as very much, at least what I've learned over the last 8 years doing online ministry, it's a very practical way to amplify what your church is doing locally, reach more people, and then kind of assimilate them into your local gathering. Now, to do that, you have to be very thoughtful, and you have to think through, you know, what's going on. And I bet we've all learned, you know, some things work online, some things don't. You try things, you're trying to, you know, engage people. You're doing virtual halls and post-service things. And the question is post-COVID, as we continue to meet and our capacities can grow, you know, what's going to continue? And I think one of my encouragements is not to throw online out. Like, don't revert back to your old mode. See online as a way to do what you need to do, but it doesn't mean you need to do everything. It doesn't mean there's some things you're going to need to stop post-COVID. There's some things you're going to continue. And then there's some things you're going to invest in. Maybe there's something there. And the two ways that I would kind of frame it is that online, for your local community, wherever you are, and no matter your size of a church, it's a great first contact. There are, you know, hundreds to thousands of people since the start of COVID, if you've started to stream your services or invest more in online, that have seen who you are without having to show up in person. I mean, if you think about how much of a commitment that is, from going from like, you know, actually showing up in person, somebody had to invite them probably a couple times. They had to be available that time. I mean, there's all these things that have to go right. And obviously Jesus is in those moments. But now with online, you get to pop things into a feed, and by empowering your members, the people that are core attenders of your church, to share that, now people get to glance into your building. They get to know what's going on inside that room that you call church. You know, I think of it as, you know, it used to be you just put a cross on top of a building and people knew what you were about. Well, now, you know, the last Netflix show or the last celebrity that said that they were a Christian, that's what they think about what Christ is. You know, most people now under a certain age, when they think about Jesus, they're probably correlating it to like what Kanye says on Twitter. And even though that might not always be a bad thing, but it's also that we now are no longer in the control of like, people know what we believe. People aren't growing up in that context. So I see online as a tremendous first contact. Just by streaming your services to Facebook or YouTube and putting it out there, people get to safely experience who you are, and you get to define those terms. The other thing is that outside just a first contact, a way to be an outreach, the other thing is that it's a companion experience. And I actually think this is a really big thing that a lot of churches do not think about. Most churches, I mean, if you have just a glimmer of evangelism, like just like excitement in you, you're like, oh wow, put it on Facebook, great. You may have a lot of questions how it works and how do you move somebody from a watcher to an attender. But the other thing is the companion. I think this is the shift that's been happening the last 10 years, where your core attender of your church, member, whatever you call that, they want to supplement. They want to show up in person, but they also want to somehow access it here. You know, the idea is that if you want to be able to start a movie on your phone and finish it on your TV, well, that's happening with our church, and it's our churches. And the idea is that you do that not because you want to cater to them, but you want to help them grow, and you want to amplify what you want to do as a church. You know, reach people and grow them up to Christ. And thinking through, how do you have a learning environment? How do you have a connection strategy that's a little bit more seamless, that it has an in-person strategy, but there's also an online element? You know, I think of it very practically. My hope is post-COVID, as you go back to in-person, when you go to plan an event, you ask the question, does this need to be in person? So if you're already asking people to show up on Sunday, you're asking them to be in a Bible study or a small group throughout the week, and now you want to now train, let's say you want to do an event for parents. The question is, what's the goal? Is the goal to love on parents, or is the goal to get them in a room and tell them to do certain things? And if the goal is to love on parents, maybe that should be a podcast, or it could be a video that you send to them. There's a different type of execution, you know, and you know, going through, you know, college and seminary, you know, we're typically trained as ministers to get people in a room and tell them to do certain things. Well, now with this online tool, we can decentralize our strategy while still having a physical flag post locally in a city. And I think this companion experience is a powerful thing. I liken it to, you know, using Robinhood, the investment app. You know, I don't know if you've used this, but a year ago, I wanted to buy some stock, and I hadn't really ever done it. And I wanted to buy some stock in Pinterest for some reason. I'm not going to get into why, but it has made me some money, which is a good thing. Not a lot, but some. But the idea with Robinhood, and this was true with E-Trade, is that essentially they removed all the gatekeepers. They made it so I didn't have to get on the phone or talk to somebody. I could just buy it seamlessly, and I could do it myself. I kind of call it like a digital IKEA. It's just, I just want to do it. I want to control it. And you got to think through your digital presence as a church as a way to kind of a first contact for new people and a companion experience. And it could be really simple. Strategy can be a very robust strategy. And I've seen churches of all sizes embrace that. So I would start thinking through post-COVID. First contact is a great way. So continue some things there and then have a companion. But those are some things I would just like to set on the table as we kind of think about this.
Kyle, you were thinking about this probably a little bit more than other people, and so while you had done some things also shifted for you. What did you notice shifting significantly, and how is it shifting again for you, Kyle?
Yeah, so I would say most of our churches before, well, not most, some of them had no online expression. But the churches that were online were predominantly, you know, kind of like Jay's saying, it's a local place with, you know, an online thing where you can peep in and pop in. Whereas then, of course, with COVID, we all shifted back to exclusively online expression. And so I think the question that, you know, Jay posed well is what's going to stay, what's going to go. And just a little bit, I'll share my thoughts on that in particular. Do you want me to share that part now, Bill? Or...
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. All right. Sounds good.
How you've been wrestling with this, and we'll continue with Jay, but I know this is something you're really thinking through.
Yeah, I would just say, so let me just go ahead and get into that then. So that's one of the things, you know, since the topic today is increasing in engagement through technology. You know, it's funny because it's interesting timing right now for a lot of us, because in some respect, many of us are now figuring out we're pivoting to gatherings again. And so we're having to figure out, you know, what do we resume? What do we not? You know, I've watched a lot of the TM webinars that are in here, and been kind of a lot of common themes that I've seen over the course of the last couple months. And I think the common consensus I've seen is that we're going to live in the both and world of in person and online. One of my personal mentors who we had in one of these talked about the thinking of ourselves as not just a physical expression, but an online ministry with physical expressions. I'm not sold on that for all churches of all sizes, even though I love my mentor, Larry Osborne. I don't know how that's going to work for everybody in all sizes. You know, one size doesn't always fit all. And so City Church, I would say, you know, just speaking of my personal experience now to answer your question, we're on the smaller end of what I would call a medium church. I've often called it a smedium church, you know, and so I know it's harder for smaller churches to keep up, with living in a both end world. And I know it's also even hard on mega churches. And so the truth is, even though we're pivoting back to in-person gatherings for kind of, for the time being, I think online is going to remain as important as ever. And I do like, Jay, kind of just what you phrased about it, that, to still think of yourself as a local expression, and that this can facilitate to that. That was a good thought. I would say it's an interesting timing that we're bringing this up now, so I'm in a little bit, I'll talk about that, just how we're managing that transition to both end, but that's kind of where we're at right now.
Just want to encourage you guys, if you have any questions, add those to there's a Q&A section. Again, if you have some things you want to add to the chat, I put a question in the chat where you might just respond a little bit to saying maybe what have you seen to be fruitful so far as you've been using these different expressions. Jay, you did a good job of trying to help us see some of the why behind why we continue to have online strategies. But I think for a lot of us, it moves then into the kind of the what and the how. Okay, I can see this. And so Kyle, I want you to be thinking about this later as well. But what are some of the whats? What are some of the hows that we begin to think about this? And I know a big question and a big fear that people start to have is, it's the question of resources.
Mm-hmm.
How do I allocate resources? And I think one of the significant resources, as we've been talking, you and I have been talking, as you've been trying to help us think about our church is, and I think you hinted at this, even the idea of someone that maybe even is the advocate for this, who's sitting in a staff meeting and who's asking or looking or thinking through this lens. So as we think about, this next even 18 months, how do we start thinking about this practically? What might it look like? And how do we begin to take maybe some steps with it?
Yeah, so, digital, it's kind of it's a hard thing to nail down, because essentially your whole church is going to have some kind of digital expression. Either it's going to be a full-blown virtual experience, like some of you guys have done, many churches on Zoom. Some of it's going to be very light, on social media, or maybe a YouTube strategy or a podcast strategy. Others are even email, email's digital. And so what's hard when you start talking about some of these things, you're like, most churches have embraced a crawl type of experience, some elementary type of experience of digital, Now the difference is how deep can somebody go through your paradigm, your methodology. And I think that's one of the hard things. And so when you talk about this, one of the hard parts is everything you're doing online speaks to who you are. I mean, I could, if I see your font choice, I could tell you most likely who you're reaching. I could, how your video quality is, how bright, everything. I was just looking at a friend's church and I was looking at the way that they were framing the shots and all this stuff. This is a small thing, but you look at a show in CBS. A CBS has like certain ways that they shoot things. It's super bright. If you go to like a show on like an AMC, it's going to be a little bit darker. And even like the joke is always like, why does CBS not do a countdown show on New Year's Eve? Well, because their audience most likely is asleep. And I mean that I mean that jokingly, but it's true. They don't do a countdown because they know. And so like all these things speak to who you are. And so that does get hard. It gets hard if church is small. It gets hard even for churches that are big, because there are limitless resources. I could tell you the churches that are I am friends with all the online pastors in the US, and I could tell you, like, I go, why don't I have that? You start getting into this comparing game. And there'd be two things that I would really encourage you. As somebody who came to faith at a church under 500, I will say that first off, Matthew 25, the parable of the talents, it's not about what you don't have, it's about what you have and how you're going to steward that. And so we all have different digital resources. I'm going to take this to the next level. Probably my hermeneutics teacher is going to get mad at me on this, but I think it's what has God given you? And one of the big things I would say is one of the easy steps that I would do, no matter if you have 10 people showing up, 150, or 20,000, is appoint somebody as the digital director. And it could be a volunteer role. Most likely, whoever has the business that they started a business in your church, and that they're nailing Facebook, Instagram well, have them represent the digital voice, and just make them almost like the quality control person, where they are part of your planning process. Doesn't mean that they have a ton of responsibility. It just means that they represent the audience. Most of the time, what I find out is if I ask the question, I go, why do you frame the shot this way? Or who responds to the DMs on your Facebook page? Or who's posting that? I just find out nobody is thinking about the online point of view, or the audience. They're thinking about, usually, and this is going to happen right now, we're all thinking about it because we're primarily online. But once you go back to in person, you're going to start to forget about, oh wait, that's also going up online. Something simple, when a lot of times what will happen in a service, you'll pull out a next step card or something for somebody to fill out. And I remember it took me a while. I had to coach my teaching team to go, hey, if you look at the camera and you say, hey, by the way, if you're watching online too, I know I just fill out this card is below here, or text this number, engagement goes up. People fill it out. And so it's thinking through, and it's hard because you have 3 audiences now. You have people watching in the room, you have people watching live on Facebook or YouTube, and you have people watching days, weeks, months later on YouTube and all these other platforms. And you want to make sure all those people take next steps. So I think everything does speak to your mission, your values, your vision. And so you probably should just do a couple things very well. The other thing, just appoint somebody as the digital, point person who can just watch everything, and their quality control, a large company like McKinsey, this is a large consulting company. They get hired to fix problems in production. What's the first thing they do? They put somebody on the ground who doesn't have a job in the whirlwind of the busyness, and they just watch everything and they evaluate. And I think you need a new volunteer role who just does that for digital. And then they'll point out things like, hey, why don't we change this is a small thing. Most churches, when they stream on Facebook, they stream the sermon title, the date, and the speaker. Guess what? The date doesn't need to be in your sermon in the stream. The date is already there. But those are things when you're going through the busyness of just streaming, you typically don't get the luxury of thinking about some of those things. Why not to do that? And I would just really have a digital, again, I'm Matt from my church. I get to do that full time because of our church size. And I understand that's a luxury. But it can be a volunteer, and pick a business leader, somebody who's doing it really well, or somebody who's under 25 that maybe has the most following, just have them own that.
That's good. That's good. I think one of the things, as you're thinking through this, Kyle, I think this was one of the things too that was helpful as we talked with you, is you began to think through that as in terms of managing resources and making sure of that. I don't know. As you, Kyle, you've kind of been open, you're, how did you say, a medium church? So as you have some background in this, but as a church, you would say we're just starting to get to that medium level. How are you thinking about trying to think through resources moving forward with this?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good question. And so I think for us, we aren't in a place where we can devote a full staff member, obviously, to that, to at least online engagement exclusively. So that's not an option for us. So we're trying to make the best choices that we have for right now. One of the things we definitely have learned through this pandemic is that you can absolutely bless people from a distance. And so that has been a lesson for us. It's been really big. And I was thinking about the Bible story this morning of, if you guys know the story of Naaman the Syrian, and I kind of think it was one of the earliest social distanced ministries that happened, because this Israeli slave girl, she gets taken away. Basically she was trafficked. There's no really other way to put it. But then her boss, she works for the boss's wife. Her boss's husband Naaman gets leprosy, which is basically a highly infectious disease. And here, the Israeli girl says, oh, you should go see Elisha. So there's letters that go back and forth, right? That's the emails going back and forth. And then he goes there to meet Elisha in person, and Elisha won't even meet with him. If you know the story, he sends his messenger to go meet him outside. And I think maybe one of the reasons was because he knew it was an infectious disease. And he says, okay, and the text says he was mad that Elisha didn't come out. He wanted him to like wave and do some kind of ritual or something. So I think like when I see that, that we're going to have people that, as we think about resources, it's like, maybe they're mad about this or that isn't, they're expecting. And so in the smaller sense, maybe you can't do everything that everyone else can. But I think I love that story because even though he never talks to Elisha, he does what he says and he goes and gets healed and ministry can happen. So I think like it's definitely an absolute, we've learned that like you don't have to be in person for God to work. So with us, where we're at right now is we're trying to figure out what it's going to mean for us to be in the both and. Now, this last weekend was actually our first one where we did the in-person outdoor gathering, and we also did a pre-recorded. But as most of you know who are doing this already, the pre-recorded is massively time-consuming to put that together. And I don't want the quality of the online to suffer. So like I kind of think of if we were to just put a camera in our outdoor gathering right now, it would feel a little bit like, a backyard, streaming a backyard experience, for lack of a better way of putting it. And people who have gotten used to this high produced thing, it might feel a little bit strange. So this is what I'm going to tell our team, actually, our staff team after this. They don't even know this yet, but I'm going to tell them, and I'm going to encourage all of us to get comfortable making a lot of, I'm calling them Matthias decisions from the book of Acts. You know the story of the book of Acts chapter 1. They picked Matthias to be the 12th apostle, and he's never heard from again. I think a lot of us in the next 6 to 18 months are going to make a lot of Matthias decisions that we pray about that seem good, that aren't the long-term answer that God has for our ministries. And there's obviously that age-old biblical debate of did they make a mistake picking Matthias? They use casting lots, which was an Old Testament strategy. They don't use the Spirit of God. And of course, Peter led it. And so maybe that was a little hasty. All that being the case, I kind of like that. When I think of where we are right now, all of our different churches, I like the decision. I lean towards the fact that it was like the right decision for them in that moment. There were two godly guys, Matthias and Barsabbas, and they prayed about it and they seemed like, hey, this is what we're supposed to do. So in this kind of pivot moment where we're thinking about resources and all that, and how we're going to engage online ministry and in person, we're going to try stuff out. We're going to pray about different things. And I think this is, if there's ever been a moment to not have golden calves, I think this is the time. And we did a few things. Now, practically speaking, when I talk about Matthias moments and all that stuff, number one, we retooled the front of our website. And we did this immediately just about when the pandemic struck, so that when people were coming online, it was basically geared towards just the online experience. And so we had a few key resources that was connected to, like that week's sermon and a few other things. There wasn't the flashy stuff like we used to have with the intro video and those kind of things, because I felt like with the COVID phase, it was like, hey, what do we need? And get straight to that. Now that we're going back to in-person and online, we're going to retool that probably again and maybe have an alternate landing page again, so that it's like, in-person, online, and different resources it takes people to. So the one part is your video. The other part is your website. Another part is your social, and all those things kind of have to be thought through. And the final piece that I would say of where we're thinking in terms of right here and right now, managing this both and, is that though right now we have an in-person event and a pre-recorded event, what I want to work towards, and this is totally fresh, literally, I'm going to tell my team this after this, is I want those experiences to be more cohesive. It was an experience that was geared towards, in person, then it was geared towards online. And now we need to find a way, even if they're separate experiences, that they are speaking the same language. And so that's kind of where we are in terms of figuring it out. We had a lot of kind of custom video pieces we were doing for the online exclusive experience. And it's very time consuming. And so I'm trying to figure out how we can maximize our resources to basically produce a cohesive experience that works for both. So that's what I'm thinking right now.
Jay, I want to give you permission. So we actually brought Jay, we actually hired him to do some consulting with us just to say, start with an audit. And I'm curious, like, and if you have to throw Beachpoint under the bus, you're welcome to, but I think it would be interesting maybe for us to think about someone with your experience when you're auditing what a church is doing online. You know, what are you looking for and what are you trying to understand? How could we as the lay people kind of understand having those eyes and looking at things with kind of those outside, again, I think having those outside eyes is really helpful. But what are the kind of things that we're looking at? Kyle mentioned some of those things as well, but what are you looking for as we start now we've been just doing this for 6 months, probably some of us with our head down, just driving, but how do we look at it and see whether it's working or not?
Yeah, so I think one of the main things that you see right away is just kind of, especially because you're, you know, for a lot of people, I know you're learning how to capture service. You know, if you've been capturing it for a while, you kind of learned how to, you know, where the camera should be, you know, issues. You know, I've had a lot of friends plant churches that start streaming stuff, you know, just with their phone. And it's just so interesting because it's so easy, but at the same time, it does communicate a lot about who you are. So one of the first things is you have to have a heart, if you're gonna record it and stream it, and if you're gonna stream it or put it up afterwards, I mean, there's a lot of ways to do this that can be powerful. I don't think you need to stream. I don't think you need to live stream for it to be a successful model. I think you could pre-record it like Kyle has done. Now, I know just talking to Kyle, he's got some video chops that I think not everybody has. And so I was joking with him. It's ironic. Most of the very famous YouTubers that go viral, it's because they were video editors that had a personality and they were able to keep their cost low, and then it grew, and then they hand off the video editing later because it does. You have to know some things. And so I think for most people, I would really think about can you do it well? And this is why it's not about being on TikTok or doing this, that, or streaming at all these places. Do one thing super well, and once you figure out that process, then bring on. So it's like, hey, just figure out how to do YouTube well, and then let's think about Facebook. One of the primary things I notice on churches right away as I scroll through, since all of us have friends that are pastors, you know, our Facebook feed since the start of COVID is just a constant church service. As I scroll, it's about where the camera is, and it's most of the time what you do is you don't think through the angle of the camera, and I actually think a lot of churches try to make this too fancy. What happens is and I don't think this is not Beachpoint, but there's another church that, you know, they have it up on a balcony pointing down, and there's this like it's an awkward angle.
That's a massive pet peeve of mine. So
yeah, I could tell by your services that you've dialed this in, but there's this, you know, you want it to feel like you're attending church, and the other thing is it's not a YouTube video where you got to cut every 15 seconds. You don't got to have this constant. You know, there's this other church that I know that is pretty large, and they have this constant movement. And it's like I'm constantly on like a jib that's like moving, and I'm getting like, I feel like I'm going to Catalina. Like, I don't know what is going on. And it's like, hey, you know, like, for example, if you watch our church service, like when our pastor's talking, it's a single shot and it's tight. And the idea is that it's attention. It's like if I'm looking at you, it's not a wide shot. I'm not seeing everything on the stage. I'm paying attention. Now, if you have a screen on your stage, some of those things you got to think, maybe you have a wide shot for the screen, but think through how you're framing it. And I think that's the number one thing. Think through your lighting. And that's where just bring some people in, like from your church, to think through like that experience. And that's one of the number one things is if you're going to put it up somewhere, you got to think about what you're putting up. And yes, the urgency at the start of COVID was, I get that. You're just doing it. And I've had this, and I've had many churches. We've had years of lead time to figure out. Trust me, we've had stuff we've put up that we're not proud of. But if you're going to do it long term, think about what you're doing. And if you can't do a live experience well, then do it afterwards. Do something where you do some post editing. I will say editing prior to Sunday takes a lot of time because you got to edit it. You got to upload it. There's a lot of stuff. Live producing, honestly, usually is a lot easier because it just takes some extra setup. And you can have volunteers that are just pointing to cameras. Editing is a different skill set than producing it live. And so, but I would think about the camera angles. And then the second thing, and I saw some people asking this in the chat, is thinking through, how do you call people to take a next step on camera? And so I think that's really important. And I do think for most churches, having a live event that you're broadcasting online probably is the ideal. It's not editing this thing prior. It's just have this event. Then all you do is that you talk to the audience, and then a couple times throughout the message, all you do is you just kind of look up to the camera and you say, hey, by the way, if you're watching with us right now, do this. And like, for example, a simple thing, a lot of churches, they're still leaning into, there was this one church, what they do is that they tell them to fill out a next step card that's in an app. And I'm like, you're a new person. So the app is great. Apps are fine. But the app is for your members of your church, the core attenders. There's the one, a new person has not downloaded your app. Like, they're not going to do that until they're super invested. And so for a new person, how do they engage? You got to say stuff like, text this number or DM our page or email us here. Think through some of those experiences. And then more importantly, who is following up on those experiences? And that's where, like, I remember when this is really embarrassing, but like when we started streaming our services, I literally asked the question, this was about 8-9 years ago. I asked the question, I go, by the way, there's a connection card on our online page. I go, where does that connection card go? I found out it was going nowhere. And so I literally, one of my first jobs, actually, I did this with a mutual friend, Matt Johnson, and we literally I had them email me a PDF, and I had like 500 connection cards that had been never followed up on, which like pained me. But we sat through and we followed up on every one. I divvied it out, and over the course of 2 weeks, we followed up on every card. But just asking, like, who does that? Or what, like on Facebook Messenger, look at your response rate. So if you're streaming to Facebook and people are private messaging you, and it's taking you, and Facebook will tell you, does it take you 3 days to respond to somebody? Or does it take you a couple hours? Those are the things you have to start thinking through. So I think think through your camera, and if you can't deliver a certain type of quality, just edit something, post, and then thinking through, how do you have call to actions throughout the service?
I think we're gonna give you a poll. Those of you guys who are attending with us, we wanna give you a poll to just think through, because as we begin to pivot, we're curious where you guys are thinking. We'll give you about a minute to think through this, but I know, Kyle, this was kind of a thought that you were having as you guys started you had your first live service this last Sunday, and this is one of the things that you're thinking through. So share a little bit what you were thinking about with this question.
Yeah, basically it's the tension between, like Jay was saying, I do have a video background, and on our team we have Obi. I think he's watching this somewhere, and Obi's just like a ridiculous editor. He's turned our whole staff into editors. But yeah, so the thing about the video part is, and you were saying like the moving, ours probably does move a lot because we do have that YouTuber, kind of background a little bit. But with that being the case, those are a ton of time. And so my question is, what's going to communicate best to that audience? And then can I do that? And this is what I'm wrestling with right now. If we go to a well-produced stream, does that treat the online audience as an afterthought, or is our online audience actually wanting to see what's happening in the room because that's the expression they want to see? And I don't know that, like, for every person, the answer is going to be exactly the same. I think there are some people for whom it's just like, get me the message, get me the word. That's all I care about. I want a taste of what you're like, or this is like, and that's fine. Other people, they may want to peep in and see what that is. I saw one of my friends who he started his outdoor in person earlier than just about anybody else did, and that I know of. And he does the pre-recorded and he streams, because he wanted to leave all the choices open of if people like that pre-recorded So it looks like from the poll, 73% of you are gonna stream. And so it looks like that's the main answer. Anyway, so interesting to think about but that's just kind of where I'm at with that question is I want to communicate to as many people as possible that we can with the resources that we have. And I certainly know that the easiest way to do that would be to stream. I think it gets complicated with music and doing that well. One of the things that we have toyed around with a little bit is still having some pre-recorded, pre-packaged music elements so that those are all well done. And you can feed that in and then cut to the live at a certain point for the message. We've talked about that as well. So it's a little bit of both. But that's kind of where my head is right now is, just figuring out what communicates to the most people and just trying to do that.
Go ahead. Oh, sorry. I didn't want to, I was going to say, I think it's really personally, and this is coming from an online pastor. So I do think that your church needs to continue to put your pedal to kind of increase the speed of thinking of in person as the premium experience. And I think online, what you do is you stream things or you offer things online, and you very much make it like there's like a party happening here, lack of a better word, that we want you to be part of. But that doesn't mean we exclude you, and you don't want to, it's kind of like the temple. You don't want to start putting up these extra walls and courts. But the idea is you want them ultimately to kind of get into the inner part. And one of the examples that we did recently, and obviously there's some production here that it takes, but we did a drive. Our church isn't meeting in person because of our size and some of those limitations, but we're doing some smaller events. And one of them was this drive-through communion experience where you could actually drive through and somebody would give you the elements and we would pray over you and you would do it. Well, the idea that we had in partnership with my worship team is I said, what if we did like a live show pre and post this event, and we actually do communion just for those online, but we have the cars driving up behind us. And the idea is that, hey, and literally you could go to Saddleback's page and you can see this test. And I want to let you know, if you see it, it's very low production. There wasn't a ton of elements to it. It was very much beta. And that was the deal with my worship pastor. As I said, I just want to try this out. And what we did was we called people out by name, and I had an iPad up just on the table, and I was saying, hey, Sally, I see you. Hey, Jared, and I was literally calling them out. And then we would say, by the way, hey, for the next hour, if you can safely get in a car, come down here. We would love to see you. And for us, one of the interesting elements, we have about 14 locations throughout Southern California. So I'm always trying to promote those too. By the way, Sunday, if you live in Yorba Linda, San Diego, we have this. And so there's this hybrid of catering to those online while also saying there's stuff happening and inviting them to come out. And I know I took the lead from there's a friend who has a church outside of Missouri. In Missouri, outside of St. Louis. They were doing this. They were showing people actually driving up for drive-ins and going in the building, showing that they can come out. So I think most churches should embrace that hybrid model. And honestly, production wise, it does take some new skills. There's no doubt. Skills that there's a bunch of stuff I know that I did not know coming out of seminary, but you could go to YouTube and find out how to use softwares like OBS and do multiple camera shots and do some of this setup. That, trust me, there are people in your church. Again, priesthood of all believers, you do not have to do this. Empower people, train them up. There are things that I'm doing that do not like for example, I have a volunteer of mine that he just helps me run Facebook ads. Trust me, like I can run a Facebook ad. I could run a pretty good Facebook ad. I don't get it all. But I empower him. I let him loose. And so there's a bunch of these new skills. Maybe the old ministries were greeters and, prayer and do all this. There's some new ministry opportunities that you just need to tap into. So I think the hybrid experiences are probably a really smart idea moving forward.
Yeah. It was interesting to see in that poll, 100% of our panelists, our attendees are seeing, they're going to do something. They're, everyone's seeing something. It's going to be pre-recorded or it's going to be streaming online. And so, obviously this is maybe a preaching to the choir kind of webinar, which is great. I just want to remind those of you who are attending with us that we're going to have a hybrid experience, watch parties for our TM conference. And so we'll put a link into the chat. If you haven't registered already, we'd love for you to show up at one of our locations. It's going to be a great opportunity for you to both have your team somewhat of a safe live experience, but also we realize we can't have thousands of us in a one location. So we're going to make the best of it. So check it out on our TM Church's website and join one of those. So Kyle, go ahead and just add to this a little bit, because I think we're seeing, as we're thinking about this, it is opening new doors for us.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, a practical way to increase the quality and make it look better is to have an A and a B camera and a switcher. That's huge. So even if you can just go from one camera to two, if that's all that some of you guys can afford to do, that helps a lot. And within that, I think it also empowers men to speak to what you were saying about, Jay, about, new ministry opportunities. Not just men. We have women that do our camera stuff too, but guys, sometimes they don't want to talk to anybody at church. They don't want to, they just want to go there and kind of sit behind something. And a camera is kind of a great place, because if they're slouching a little bit, they're sleeping, you're not going to catch it too bad. Their main job is just to sit there. But it really does that. Going to an A and a B camera, that's a practical thing that anyone can do. That's not that much more in terms of resources. And I think it can bump up the quality. When we did that, that really helped. So I was just going to tack that on. And then I was just going to ask you, Bill, what are you going to do? You're going to go pre-record it, or are you going to stream?
Right now, we'll continue. We're streaming right now and figuring that out. But I don't know. Jay's auditing us, and he'll tell us what we're doing well and what we're not. But that's part of that is we wanted to get some outside eyes and not assume that. And interesting for us is we have found not only is this a great opportunity for new people, this is a great opportunity for young people to have an ownership role in your church. Probably 60% of our tech team, since we've done all this, are high school kids. They love working the cameras. They love working the tech. We've got a kid producing who's I think he's a junior in high school, but he's choosing between the shots. And I mean, they love it. They come early, stay late, but it's their church. It's been one of the neat things. Hey, I do want to just help. We've got a couple questions. Doug and Brandon are both asking questions about really trying to think about how we assimilate people through online strategy. So I don't know, Kyle, what you've had, and Jay, one of the things, Jay, I really loved that I heard you say to my students in the class was use this phrase, and maybe I hope I have it right, but this idea of online to offline. There was the thought, and I think what I really appreciate about you is you're always thinking about making disciples. It's not just about extending views, but I think we've really been challenged over these last 6 months is how do we increase engagement? How do we move people, in essence, into the life of our church more than just watching? And Jay, what are you seeing? And then Kyle, maybe what have you seen work?
Yeah, so it's kind of ironic when you think about online or like the internet that we're using at this moment, and we have been, even the internet is dependent on physical servers. That's hardware that's on the ground. And so it's important that for the internet to work, it needs offline type of devices. And I think the same thing with your church. It's never I don't think this is an extremist type of conversation where you're all in or all out. Now, sometimes those are the things that get told, and it's like, can church happen online? And we kind of lean towards these extremes. It's like the conversation with social media. It's like social media is hurting us. Well, yeah, anything used incorrectly, fire could either burn your house down or it could cook your meal. I mean, that's the common sense response. And so I think what we lean towards is really this idea is that online is going to amplify your strengths and amplify your weaknesses. And so one of the things that I get asked a lot is, is this idea that, what if people just watch online and they never come in person? And really the idea is that I have found churches that are super weekend focused have that problem, and churches that have a more robust discipleship assimilation strategy, they don't have that problem. Because guess what? My church is my church, not because I just love the teaching. Yeah, I love my pastor teaching, but guess what? My kids go there. I serve there. I give there. I'm part of a small group there. That's why it's my church. And so I think a lot of churches do need to realize that it is going to maybe highlight some gaps in your process. You know, if it was that easy for people to disconnect from your strategy during COVID, then maybe some of the relationships were a little weak. And honestly, our church having that too in some of the parts. I mean, that is a kingdom issue. And so I think it's figuring out, what does a strategy look like? What does engagement look like for your church that's beyond just pushing something to Facebook? And so, for example, for us, there's a couple things that we've determined. Now, I'm in a unique situation because I'm an online pastor, but one of the things that I realized very quickly is that if I could get a watcher into our Facebook group, on an email list, and into a group, an online group with other people, now it's not just this virtual type of community. They're interacting with other people. And then if I made sure my groups were healthy, then my online community was healthy. So I would start thinking through, how do you get right now, most people are doing corporate gatherings pretty well. I mean, they've started to figure it out. Obviously, there's fine tuning of things. The real issue is, how do you get peer-to-peer or small gatherings or medium gatherings down? And so, for example, there was just a church that was asking me something about, they were doing these Zoom connects after their services. And they were like, we only have 40 or 30 people. And I'm like, yeah, that's the point of it. It's not about, you're not going to get every Facebook reach number or every YouTube impression into this thing. It's about deep connection. So I think this is why one of the things I would really encourage every church to think through is, I might actually start by drawing your ministry paradigm, whatever that looks like for your church, and it's going to look different. But I would draw the funnel, or whatever, the flywheel, the bases, whatever it is, and actually go, okay, how much of this do we want to provide online, at least as an introductory step? So maybe, okay, yeah, we have this service, great. Do we want to provide maybe an introductory class over Zoom? You know what? Yeah, some people can't always make it in person, or what? Yes. You know what? Do we want to provide them to be able to be part of a group? Yeah. Do we want them to go on missions? You know what? No. And then you draw a line. Okay, we're going to start to think through how to do this online, but here's where we're going to push back. We're going to have a pastoral moment where we're going to go, you know what? You need to do that in person. For example, for us, for our online community, we have membership to our online community. But when you commit to becoming a member, you have to start a group in your home. And so we actually say that you can't just be online. You need to have face-to-face connection. And so that's our line. For your church, obviously, it might be, you know what, counseling, for example, is a great example. Maybe you might find out post-COVID, Zoom counseling can work, but it might only work for 1 month. Where ultimately, like if you ever marriage counseling, maybe you'll find out more people will start marriage counseling if you start digital, but you don't want to go the long term that way, because obviously that's not perfect, long term. And so I think those are the conversations. And then the other thing is measurement, because I think what gets measured gets resourced. And so I think I would start thinking through, write down every week your views, like how many people are viewing it, how many people are watching like a 5-minute metric on these platforms, and then how many people are taking next steps, and start looking at the correlation between views and next steps. And next steps would be how many people message you, email, text you in a given week. So great, we had 500 views this past week on all of our platforms, but you know what? 10 people messaged us. And if you constantly look at those numbers week over week, what I have found, even, and this is a very transparent example of this, 2 Easters ago, we had our biggest weekend Easter ever. It was actually our biggest online service ever. But year over year on Easter wise, we were down about 30% on salvations, like people had indicated salvations. And one of the reasons is because our pastor had done 2 messages during an Easter. So what I had realized, we had grown, but what happened was there was a bunch of members just double attending. So yes, it was our biggest week ever. And I'm excited about that. I'm not saying I'm not excited about that, but I knew one of the reasons why salvations were down. So we're actually kind of smaller on our outreach. And those are conversations, because I look at those numbers regularly, both the views and I'm looking at next steps. Those are the things you'll find. And you'll find out like, wow, you know what? When I looked at the camera and said this, I increased engagement. Or you know what? You'll start having conversations in like a debrief the next week. You go, why did nobody fill out this card or text us in? Well, you know what, Bill, you didn't bring it up. You just talked to the people in the room. Those are the things, again, your online director, your volunteer role will kind of point out like, yeah, we didn't have that online, or you didn't even say something. or the number didn't work. I mean, those are like, we just had this week where we have a text response number. And one of the questions I had to make sure, we've been doing this text response thing. A lot of churches, what they do is text responses. People will text in and you'll text them a long form. And so the question is like, I'm not saying that that's a bad strategy. I'm just saying, try it out. And if you realize nobody's filling out the form, maybe don't send them the long form. Maybe you need to actually text them something more personal. So an easy way is we tend to automate the first step, then we personally follow up an hour or later with a volunteer team. So we'll try to get them the thing right away, but then we go, hey, by the way, I saw that you text in. Did you ever get into a group? And there's some personal. So anyways, those are some of the things that I would think about. I know that's a lot, but I would start framing and considering.
Yeah, you almost, I mean, if I'm hearing you right, it's no different than what we've always been doing in church, where if you want to use the illustration of the funnel, like we're trying to move people down a pathway, kind of funnel them into, I use Saddleback's terms, into the core.
Yeah.
But what we may need to think about is, rather than turning everything we used to do physically into an online version, thinking about different kinds of next step online engagement pieces that could be online or could be physical. And so the simple thing, I think maybe the oversimplifying what we've tried to do is just turn everything we used to do into an online version. And we need to have maybe some freedom to think a little different from that. And it seems to me too, as I'm hearing both of you guys, we're gonna have to be willing to try some things and be okay that they don't work. Like I see Jack's about the Zoom lobbies. My photo right here, my background, I'm actually not at the church, but this is our virtual patio. And Jack, I'll tell you, in our first few weeks, yeah, we had people show up. Now, the last 5 weeks, we have one lady who shows up, and she just is this one lady in our online house. And it just, you know, people are like, I'm fine, I'll see you around at things. But we looked at that, and we've shifted and pivoted to something different.
An example of just learning, like one of the things that I want to do with my community is always connect people nearby. And I have this large geographical footprint because people tune in from all around the world. One of the things we've been doing during COVID is we've been doing these Zoom meetups for cities. So Phoenix, last night I did one for Las Vegas. So I sent a message to all of our Las Vegas people. I said, hey, if you're part of Las Vegas, come to the Zoom meetup at 6 p.m., you know, and you promote it. And, you know, the last nights I had 3 people show up, which was great. I've had a couple, only one show up. I've had one, nobody showed up. And it's part of that, like, just, it's trying. Now there's some other issues to that, but it's hard. It's just, you're trying to figure out. For example, I think the Zoom lobby thing is great, but I would reframe it to, like, if you're not connected to our community, you do something monthly or every other week. Because a new person, you know, the thought is that people that are brand new to your community, they're asking questions. Those are already assimilated. They're probably already watching. They're serving. There's no real purpose to jump on. Now, the start of COVID, I think there was, because people are scared and there's all sorts of stuff. But it's stuff like that. Like, yeah. So I think that experimented mindset is really important.
That's good.
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah, I'm gonna throw up one poll, one final poll. Just the things that you see yourselves doing. We're curious to see, what do you see? You can check any that apply as you look at it. Kyle, go ahead and.
I was just gonna say that one day I'm gonna write a book, and it's gonna be called "If You Build It, They Might Not Come." And I'm serious. So none of you out there watching this take this title from me, but it is my journey in church. And so with that, what I think, like, just like before with church engagement, you know, honestly, none of our churches were like exploding, except maybe Jay with Rick Warren over there. But I'm speaking our TM churches, and, you know, and so like we all got, you know, when you go to something, you hear people talk about how, oh, you know, you can't just assume people show up on Sunday, right? You gotta get in there. Well, I think the same thing is true with online. And so we can't just assume they're going to get there. And so my little kind of thing I'm really feeling is, ministry leaders, we just need to rediscover the OG hustle. Like, you know, there's nothing that can substitute hustling to get somebody into a gathering. And I think probably the biggest shock for me when I went from a huge church to planting one was, instead of just having a natural amount of people that would be at an event that we called out from the front, it was like, no, like I had to pull people to get there. And I think it's the same thing. And, you know, of course, now I know that even for the larger churches, that wasn't true. You still have to pull them in. You still got to reel them in. We're fishers of men, you know. And so I think when it comes to engaging online, you know, whether it's discipleship wise or you're just going for interaction, we've got to hustle. We've got to pull those contacts in. And like Jay, kind of how you're saying, you know, you can't just assume send them a form and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, now I feel loved and I feel the connection from the church. They want that and they're seeking that's going to come from a person. So anyway, so just rediscovering the art of OG hustle. For all of us, we can't just sit back and expect they'll come to our thing or in person or online. So that would be what I would say.
Yeah, that's good. I'm going to give this, we're going to just do a final thought from you, Jay, as we close out. I just want to remind everyone, you know, at the heart of this, and I think the reason why we wanted Jay on here, the purpose is we're trying to figure out how to make disciples. That's the heart of TM, is healthy pastors, healthy churches, more churches. We're about disciple making. That's it. This is a means to an end. Next week's webinar is going to be about disciple making. Our chat team will be leading that, and we'll be thinking through that. And so we want to encourage you to register and to be a part of it. And I think too, you're going to see again that these are means to an end. I know a lot of us, we use the oikos strategy. It's been fascinating in some ways. I think things that we never thought of. You know, I'll share, because we'll use Facebook as one of our means. I'll host a watch party, which is always weird that I'm hosting a watch party. Come watch me talk. But it's been fascinating, the connections of my oikos, and even the way it's expanded my oikos to high school friends that I haven't, they're Facebook friends, but now they watch our service and we're making those connections. Or, you know, people, and I think what we've learned is there's, particularly when it comes to our oikos, there's tremendous potential for increased engagement. Jay, any last things you want to just encourage us with as we think about this?
Yeah, I definitely think just a couple things is definitely pick an approach to how you're going to think about online post-COVID, because it's going to be helpful in how you resource and allocate time, you know, especially get a volunteer to oversee it. So think about a hybrid, think about weekend. I mean, start processing some of these things, because it's going to start coming up real quick. The other thing is just continue to process, and I would even write out, like, how does somebody move from a watcher to attending in person? What are the touch points? And almost like a first impressions. It's like a digital first impressions. Like, where could people get lost? How can we get better? How can we be better at the call to action to get people engaged? Who's responding? And I have found, just like anything, like if you have good faith that you know you can move somebody from a watcher to showing up in person, then you could go out with good faith and have like a strategy where you could go create like a Facebook ad, and you know, like it's going to work. Sometimes people jump the gun and they just start boosting things, which is okay. I've done that too as like an experiment, but have a good strategy. Like if you know it works, then you can go out and you can put some resources into, even if it's $10, you know, it's something, you know, I'm like kind of like what Kyle said. I'm that guy with my own like things. Like part of the reasons why I create things and I upload things, because I'm constantly learning by doing it myself. And so I do things. I've created ads for all sorts of platforms just to learn the process. And so I think I would just encourage you, pick an approach post-COVID, think through and actually diagram out the process, and then appoint somebody to kind of be over that, a new volunteer role. And then if you know that's going well, I would definitely consider investing some resources post in like a simple ad. Do those other things first, so you know how it works. Because if you're just trying to like pour money into an ad strategy that doesn't correlate, that's pointless. But once you know everything works, then you can go out and do stuff, and you can start reaching people in a whole new venue, you know, a whole new way post-COVID.
Well, thank you, Jay and Kyle. It's so good to have you guys with us. We're looking forward to next week. We'll think a little bit more about discipleship. I want to leave us with this thought that, as you suggested, I think one real simple takeaway is I think we can each go back, think about who's that one person or who are those couple people that maybe can just be those eyes, whether it's on our team formally or a volunteer. But it seems to me this is so important to have fresh eyes looking. So guys, thank you so much. Thank you everyone that attended. We will see you next week. We'll see you at a watch party. Make sure you register online at TM Churches. And guys, we'll see you next week.
Later.